University TV. I'm Ava Colopy, a writer of fiction and nonfiction and poetry. My Facebook and website are Ava Colopy Books. Today I'm going to talk about this book, Unfinished Business. A Democrat and a Republican take on the 10 most important issues women face, by Dr. Julianne Malveaux and Deborah Perry. I found this book randomly at one of my various visits to the award-winning Multnomah County, Portland, Oregon public library system. I was drawn to it because it has both a Democrat and a Republican on the cover, and my country has been torn apart by partisanship more than ever since the attacks of September 11, 2001. After this brief unity that we had as a country, it has just been nothing but partisanship. So this looked to me like it was a step in the right direction and people trying to work together on something, which is really what we need. I like how in this book they express women's issues as being more than maybe 2 or 3 key issues, more than just domestic violence, the pay discrepancy, and birth control issues. They address in the chapters of their book equal pay, work and family, education, the economy and taxes, the economic safety net, crime and violence, race matters, reproductive rights, foreign policy and globalization, and the environment in 10 nifty chapters. Yes, women's issues are human issues, and economics and globalization definitely affect people and therefore affect women. Women's issues, and indeed men's issues, are not a narrow and limited subject. When I taught U.S. history in the past year, when we got to the unit on civil rights, I would say things like African American human rights and women's human rights, because it isn't just about their rights, it's about human rights in general. And if you were being treated the way that they were being treated, you would stand up for yourself and do something about it too. And that took it out of the context of just being about a certain group of people, or the students thinking maybe it was about a certain political view, and it might be the political view that their parents don't agree with. Instead, I made it about human rights because that is what it's about. So I portrayed it as such. And this gets us into women's rights, but it isn't just looking at it as women's rights as a separate issue, as if women's rights is a separate issue from society and human issues, which it certainly is not. So when I saw this book, I was very glad that a Democrat and a Republican, and that an African American and a Caucasian could sit down and work together on a book. However, when I began reading it, I saw that they had actually written 2 different essays apart from each other on the same subject. So in practice, they really didn't work together, and they maintained partisanship, unfortunately. This book was published in 2002, and I have seen nothing since then but my country tearing itself apart with partisanship. In fact, the troubling thing about this book is that when they write about the issues, it sounds as if they are writing about 2 completely different countries, and they're both writing about the United States. One is a country with many hardships that are nearly impossible to overcome, and one is a country with hills of golden opportunities and rainbows galore for anyone who's just willing to not be lazy. It isn't really surprising that an African American woman from a poor working class background and a white woman from a privileged background would talk as if they're from 2 different countries, because in practice they almost are. Frankly, I resonated more with what the African American from the working class background had to say, because it is closer to my reality as someone from a very poor working class background. Regardless of what some say, no one ever has equal opportunities, not even here in the US. It is better than many, many countries in the world, but I must say that even after I got a master's degree in business administration in Ireland, no one cared about my degree. In Ireland, but also back here in the US, because I wasn't from a wealthy, well-connected family, nobody cared. It was still assumed that the most I should hope for is to become an Apple Green or Dollar General store level manager. a job that does not require you to have more than a high school diploma, otherwise called a secondary school leaving cert in other countries. My MBA was an irrelevant fancy piece of paper as far as the entire job market was concerned. Getting degrees did not level the playing field for me at all. And that is one of the biggest issues in my country. It is not the meritocracy that many claim and like to imagine it is, and like to insult and belittle millions of working class people over, to speak and act as if poor people are only poor because they're lazy, rather than that our system is a rigged game where almost only those born into wealthy families in the first place can ever go far and achieve much. I even had to randomly meet a traveling Irishman and leave the country to go somewhere where I could even afford to go to college. Though in fairness, I paid for my bachelor's degree with FAFSA student loans from the US. Paid for my master's degree out of pocket because I then had a teaching job that required a college degree. Now, it may not be possible to ever have a truly level playing field. And as with communism, if we try to make everyone have the same status, pay, and ownership of things, we disincentivize quality and achievement and hard work. I would just demand that people admit that it is not a level playing field. That there is no such thing as a level playing field in life anywhere. But I do like how the authors of this book tackle many issues that involve women in this country today and elsewhere in their book. So getting into the crucial, essential skill of critical thinking skills, reading, writing, basic maths, and critical thinking, I'm going to discuss what this book and the article America the Merciless by Pamela Paul, published by the New York Times June 26th of this year, 2022, makes me think of in order to help our viewers better develop their own critical thinking skills. I think that the biggest social issues we have in the US today can be put into a few simple categories. Actually, because all the other problems stem from these core problems with US society today. In my view, there is a real rotten core of selfishness in our country's society today, which pervades nearly everything. People focus on what they want, often just in the moment, and don't care about the good of their larger community. Examples of this can be seen across social strata, religious and political views, and generations. One example of this is a common scene of an anti-abortionist at a rally holding up a sign that reads, "I regret my abortion." One could argue in a way that it is a huge convenience and a luxury to be able to regret this, and it demonstrates clear and cruel selfishness. The self-identified pro-life movement is known to have many members who got abortions when it was their crisis pregnancy. Then they immediately turn around and want to deny the same access to everybody else. Sometimes even women suffering from ectopic pregnancies, which need to be aborted or the woman will die because they are pregnancies within the fallopian tube, not the uterus. Looking back on US history, there is very unfortunately a long and toxic history of this element of selfishness as well, infecting our nation's great vision as a land of opportunity, free from tyranny, oppression, or one branch of the government having too much power. Some examples of this are keeping African American human beings as slaves, the nativist backlash against German immigrants during World War I, keeping women from having the vote at the national level until 1920, and keeping Japanese people in internment camps during World War II, even if they were US citizens, as most were. When African American World War I veterans came home, they faced incredible discrimination, even though they had honorably served our country, most famously with the amazing Harlem Hellfighters. This led to the Red Summer race riots in 1919. Our country has sadly had many race riots, even in the past few years. Because of this sickly selfishness seething under the surface of a nation founded on very forward-thinking, egalitarian principles of democracy and equality. This seems to me like a disease which we should work to cure our nation of, At our best, we are an incredible land of opportunity, and I think we should consciously embrace this higher potential as much as possible. From what I see, the majority of people here are incredibly focused on getting what they want, even if it's at a great cost to everyone around them. And they have been increasingly unwilling to even attempt to find compromise that everyone could benefit from or agree on. One example of this is both sides of the abortion debate. They both exhibit an all or nothing mentality. The extreme side of the conservatives fights for a 100% ban on abortions, often including ectopic pregnancies. They have even gone so far as to try to make an accidental miscarriage be illegal as well, probably because they were thinking that a woman could pretend that she had miscarried when she had intentionally induced a miscarriage, induced abortion, and wanted to hide the fact. But this means that in practice, women who suffered the trauma of a miscarriage, of a pregnancy that they wanted, would face jail or prison time, in addition to losing what they were seeing as the new member of their family that was going to come along. This nation can be truly cruel and merciless, even towards its most vulnerable and traumatized citizens, like teen girls who are pregnant from rapes. On the other extreme side, most extreme liberals want full abortion access, even late-term abortions, sometimes called partial birth abortions. And ideally, they want this to be covered by health insurance providers or through state-funded health insurance, meaning their fellow taxpayers would be helping them foot the bill for the procedure, even though some of those taxpayers feel morally opposed to abortion because they believe it to be murder. And they would feel that, in most cases, this meant they were paying for other people to have sex, like prostitutes, and to have abortions. Both sides at the extreme show absolutely no respect for the other's point of view and do not make any attempt whatsoever to find some kind of a middle ground that would help enable us all to live and function side by side in the one country. I don't think that either side of the political spectrum, liberal or conservative, can completely blame the other side for the way our country is today. It is more because of everyone's unwillingness to try to find a middle ground, some kind of compromise, and work from there for the common good of the country. This is the biggest problem in our country today, though there are a few very rare exceptions, such as Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley, who frequently tries to put forward bills which are bipartisan, such as for the better care of our veterans when they return home. I think we are in a second civil war and have been since shortly after the 9/11 attacks. This is a civil war of arguments and ideologies, of trying to force one's view and one's view only into law and force those laws on everyone else, a kind of ideological and lifestyle rape. Basically, no one in this country is even making an attempt to live together in the one country anymore. Everyone acts like they despise anyone with a different view, and they do not perceive those other people as fellow U.S. American citizens. But we are all citizens of the same country, and we need to work to find a middle ground, a compromise on all matters, so we can all continue to share this great nation of ours. This constant fighting over only a few key issues is enabling our elected leaders to do little more than spew rhetoric in line with their view, support 2 or 3 key issues, and then handily avoid addressing the many other problems we have right now that in fact affect us more than the 2 or 3 hot button issues they pick on in order to sidestep having to do their full real jobs. For example, the federal disaster of the public school system in this country. It needs to be overhauled, and we need to end the No Child Left Behind system that makes it so that schools are willing to cut corners in educational standards in order to get good enough test grades that they won't lose their federal funding. We need to hire more teachers so each teacher has smaller, more manageable classes, and so each learner can receive proper attention and teachers stop burning out at breakneck speed. Roads need to be repaved nationwide. We need to create new jobs, especially since losing so many to NAFTA and other efforts for companies to save money by shipping out all our manufacturing jobs. Solar and wind farm building could help us do that while providing us with more clean energy, or clean after the manufacturing of the solar panels and the wind turbines. And there's much more that needs to be done in this country. The care of this and other infrastructure is the job of politicians. Their job isn't actually to sit around pontificating on all their citizens' sex lives, e.g. gay rights and abortion, while they suck all our tax money and produce little or no actual results. What the citizens are or not doing with their sexual and reproductive organs is actually not the business of politicians at all, as long as it is all between consenting adults. What is their business is the infrastructure they are completely neglecting at all citizens' expense and to the detriment of our whole nation. If they want to police something related to sex, they should go and police and really take action on all the human trafficking going on, which is modern-day slavery. If the Senate was disbanded and all that money put back into the system, we could afford more public school teachers and therefore have much smaller classes with far better personal attention to each individual student, which would make a huge difference to our society in a positive way, to the mental health of our country's youth, their academic achievement, and it could massively slow down teacher burnout rates. And that would lessen the burden on single parents and families where both parents work, i.e. all the families today, pretty much. Students in our country are getting record low scores in essential skills like reading, writing, and math these days, and that's not surprising given how badly run the public schools are and at times how little they have to work with, how overworked the teachers and the other school staff are, and how either overworked or checked out the parents are. Many sources say that roughly 48% of U.S. teachers want to leave education, and many parents are abandoning their kids to be raised by grandparents who are often already exhausted from having raised their own kids. There is no future for our community, our country, if all these trends continue. Another major problem in the U.S. today is that the majority of adults, by age anyway here, have the wrongful tendency to not participate in the political process. People seem to have forgotten that because this country was founded to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we, the people, need to do our part. We are the fourth part of the checks and balances. The U.S. government has 4 branches, not 3. It has the executive, the legislative, the judicial, and the people. We need to do our part. Further, no major changes should be made into laws without popular vote of we the people. It is not our government's place or right to force their will upon us because we are a democratic republic. So, for example, when the Supreme Court recently overturned Roe versus Wade, that was an absolute abuse of power, which was exercised without any checks or balances. The Roe v. Wade legalization of abortion issue should have been put to a popular vote of we, the people. That would have actually followed our founding fathers' vision and the law, constitutional law. The Constitution never gave the Supreme Court the right to interpret the Constitution. The Supreme Court gave itself that right. Whether you're for or against Roe v. Wade isn't really the issue here. That the Supreme Court decided it had the right to change a national law is. They shouldn't believe that they have the right to rewrite our laws without consulting we the people. And the people should protest it and demand that this issue be brought to popular vote. And not an all or nothing vote, but one that respects the complicated nature of this issue with regards to situations of medical safety, threats to the life of a pregnant woman, rape and incest, and fatal fetal abnormalities. Republicans and Democrats needn't be arguing about Roe v. Wade. They should band together against the tyranny of a government that believes it has the right to interpret and reinterpret our laws without asking us, which goes against the law of the land, the Constitution. They should band together to force the government to give us a national vote on this issue and indeed all issues. Let the people decide, and let us all have to live with the majority rule like we're supposed to. The more we fight with each other, the more our government goes unchecked and violates our founding fathers' vision for this great nation. The more we fight each other, the more our elected representatives don't have to do anything but suck up our tax monies and produce little or no actual results. Or simply take away our rights without asking us, as they just did by overturning Roe v. Wade without a popular vote. Our politicians are not solely to blame. They can only act and react in an environment that is created by the citizens. There are millions of U.S. citizens that don't even vote. Many don't even bother to register. They do not do their job as citizens. They do not rally against election fraud. They do not protest anything. They do not want the workload of the actual job of being a citizen of a democracy. To be an active and involved citizen who educates herself or himself on the issues du jour and takes a willing and active role in the process of keeping a country, a society running. Too many people would rather do nothing more than sit around, watch TV, rant on social media, which has never caused any political view to be enacted into law, by the way, smoke pot or drink, and not take any adult responsibility for what is supposed to be their part in keeping our country a righteous democracy. In a related matter, a big part of why teachers here often hate their jobs and want to leave education is because the kids are out of control, because their parents do not behave like adults and teach them any manners, rules, boundaries, structure, or even that they're cared about. Many aren't. It is notoriously difficult amongst public school staff today to get a hold of parents when issues come up. Many grade school kids come to school cussing, show no respect for teachers or other adults, and have no manners in general because their parents haven't done their job. Many parents today throw their kids at the schools and act as if it is the school staff's job to raise their kids for them. Good kids start at home, and if parents don't do their job, school staff can't do ours. And the majority of adults today in this country do not want to act like adults. So many parents don't parent, and sadly, eventually teachers get fed up and exhausted and overworked until many teachers don't teach. Many parents shove their kids in front of TVs, tablets, or other devices and use them as babysitters, and many teachers shove their students in front of Chromebooks, assign nominal work that the students just copy and paste to finish, and then the kids learn nothing and can barely read and write even in the 11th and 12th grades in public schools. There is no future for a country like this. I myself have had students in the 11th grade who could barely put 2 sentences down on a page for me. I work very hard to try to help them, but there's only so much you can do in 1 year when you only see them for 45 minutes, 5 days a week. And they fight you on everything all the time. And it takes months before they even believe that you're someone who actually cares and wants to do your job. This needs to be fixed. And what would help is a government that actually does its job running the economy so parents don't need to work 2 and 3 jobs just to get by. And where teachers don't have 25, 30, or more out of control students in every classroom. We should have under 20 in each classroom. That is a manageable amount, even when they're difficult. That would mean increasing schools' budgets by perhaps spending less money on campaign donating weapons manufacturers. To have endless wars when what we need to do with other countries is trade and diplomacy, which would bolster our economy and create a more stable and more certain future. And then schools could hire more teachers. But instead of doing their jobs, politicians keep the partisan arguments going in order to get votes to secure their power and money and do absolutely nothing for the people they supposedly represent. We need to all work together to stop this completely unproductive, toxic cycle and make this nation what it is supposed to be. Let me show you an example of what a compromise on an extremely divisive issue would look like. My mother self-identified as both pro-choice and pro-life. Most people would say that you can't be both, that you have to pick a side, but there is a middle ground. And For my mother, it looked like this. Support legal access to abortion in the first 2 trimesters, but support every effort to prevent unwanted pregnancies, such as full, medically accurate, age-appropriate sex education, and offer supports for pregnant women such as free prenatal care and confidential adoption services. And with my mother, sex education was a no permission slip. She lectured us about sexually transmitted diseases, especially HIV/AIDS, and how it was an absolute cruel and extremely painful death sentence in the 1990s. And even when I was small, she gave us a book designed to show small children where babies come from. Rather than be tempted, we found it all incredibly disgusting. My siblings and I took it as more proof that adults were weird and gross, and it made us sure than ever that we would never want to do any of that. More importantly, it showed us drawings of human fetuses at various stages of development. This made pregnancy and fetuses very real for us. My mom was very smart to do that. So rather than the extreme conservatives' approach in this country of having teen girls and women in crisis running to family planning clinics, being forced to look at their ultrasound to teach them after the fact what a human fetus looks like, it makes sense to teach them that in childhood so the realities of pregnancy are already in their heads, are real to them, both boys and girls, and before they're teenagers with raging hormones and a massive rebellious streak. She also taught us about avoiding sexual assault and how traumatic rape is to women, not just to her girls, but also to her boy. She would involve him in these discussions too, so that he would know that it was wrong. And why? If all parents talked to their sons like that, we would live in a very different world, a better world. My father was raised Catholic, and he didn't know how to talk to us about anything sexual. Mom found it very uncomfortable, but she forced herself to do it as a responsible parent, as one should be or should not have kids. My mother's approach to sex ed was very intense and forced us to think critically about the decisions we would one day make. She would say things like, "One day, when you're a teenager, you'll have those hormones and want to have sex, and I won't physically be able to stop you. But if you choose to have sex, you could easily get HIV and die a slow, cruel death, or get pregnant and have to decide to bring a child into poverty, or give it to strangers and never know if it had a horrible life, or choose to abort but had the potential to be your next family member, and then you will have to live with those decisions for the rest of your life. And you won't get any sympathy from me because you won't be able to say I didn't warn you." Some people may think this sounds harsh, but it wasn't. It's called parenting. It's what adults with kids are supposed to do. Harsh is not preventing your kids from dying of HIV/AIDS. Being pro-choice means different things to different people. Many people who are technically pro-choice do not like abortions and would not get one themselves. Many people who are well known for being pro-choice, such as the author Barbara Ehrenreich, have openly criticized some of the reasons why other people get abortions, such as finding out that their future baby will be deaf, but they support the fundamental ideal that you do not have the right to decide for someone else what to do with their body and their life. I personally think a good rule of thumb with this is that if you aren't willing to adopt someone's future baby and raise it yourself, then you really don't have anything to say about it and about them getting an abortion. Of course, prevention would be best. I have repeatedly looked this up and seen that in countries where abortion is illegal, it always still happens. Legalizing abortions does not stop them. It causes girls and women to seek unsafe, illegal ones. And many times they die from these procedures, which are often performed by unscrupulous people with no medical training who are just taking advantage of them, just want the money. Teen girls and women end up dying with their intestines coming out through their birthing canal because the uterine wall has been punctured by implements such as knitting needles. In fact, according to many reputable sources, including the World Health Organization, abortion rates can be typically higher in countries where abortion is illegal. This is because those countries tend to be extremely conservative and therefore oppress women, do not tell males that they should not rape women and girls, and ban comprehensive, medically accurate, age-appropriate sex education and often deny people access to birth control. In oppressive societies that aim to control females and our bodies, girls are taught to be quiet, listen to men, mind what they wear, and so on, which does not teach them that they have a right to say no. No to pressure to have sex, no to having sex without a condom or other protection, no to being taken advantage of, no to abuse. They also don't teach males not to sexually assault females or that their urges are their problem and their responsibility, regardless of what a female is wearing. And this leads to more unwanted pregnancies. These societies blame women for sexual violence and do not force males guilty of the crime of sexual assault to take responsibility for their own actions. In Nairobi, Kenya, consent classes based around the premise of real men don't rape reduced rape by 51%. Rapes can and do lead to unwanted pregnancies and therefore abortions. So obviously the world should follow Kenya's lead in this matter and start including consent classes in schools around the world. Preventing unwanted pregnancies is key, and comprehensive, medically accurate, age-appropriate sex education with consent classes that teach males about their responsibility to control themselves and take responsibilities for their own actions would be an essential part of that. Though I will say that consent should be taught for both sexes for those rare women who are sexual predators. Some of the victims of sexual violence, the survivors of it, are males as well. I am all for telling kids to wait to have sex, definitely, but by explaining to them why it is best to wait rather than the kind of abstinence-only sex ed that only says, don't do it, which in my country has produced staggering rates of teen pregnancies and teen STD, sexually transmitted disease infections. Just saying don't do it has been repeatedly proven to not work. And so I will pause here to remind everyone what Albert Einstein, a brilliant man, said about the definition of insanity, that it is to do the same thing over and over again and then expect a different result. I.e., what conservatives in the US do with their approach to sex ed and illegalizing abortions. If you really want to stop abortions, you will work on preventing unwanted pregnancies. Legalizing them does not stop them. If you don't believe me, go do the research yourself from reputable sources. You will see that what I'm saying is true. I do my research. As for the extremely controversial issue of whether healthcare should cover the cost of birth control for women as part of basic female healthcare, if we can't agree on this issue, and I think it's safe to say that we can't, then perhaps we could compromise on health insurance covering 50% of the cost of birth control for women, and men for that matter. Interestingly, as far as I know, men's health insurance does not cover birth control. I think this is a major men's and women's issue. If women get birth control paid for even partially, then men should too, because that's gender equality. And if men have easier access to birth control, then that may take some of the burden of this responsibility off women. Of course, it's also interesting that some male health insurance will cover the generic form of Viagra, and that anti-abortionists oddly never protest men having access to Viagra drugs. Even ones that are registered sex offenders, they do not ever have nationwide religious campaigns to encourage pharmacists to not fill men's prescriptions for Viagra or take their prescription papers from them so they can't go to a different doctor or a different pharmacist and get the prescriptions filled, which they did do to women when women were trying to access birth control as a nationwide effort for Christian pharmacists to not fill women's birth control prescriptions, take their prescription papers from them so they couldn't go to a different pharmacy as well. This demonstrates that the true fight they're on here is not even about birth control or people having these active sex lives. It is about controlling women and controlling women's bodies and keeping women from having independence in our own lives. This doesn't, of course, mean that everyone that identifies as pro-life feels the same way about this. As for the extremely controversial debate about whether a fetus is a person from conception or only becomes a person at birth, though it seems everyone here in this country will say there is no middle ground on this, let me offer you one which is based in medical science and seems pretty blatantly obvious: viability. The point at which a fetus can survive outside a woman's body without medical devices, which is at about 24 weeks, whereas the trimesters are at 12 and 26 weeks. Abortion laws are often centered on trimesters, banning them after the first or second trimester. To the outside observer, this seems like very arbitrary lines to draw. Viability looks like a true line. The point at which a fetus can actually live without medical equipment outside of a woman's body, I think we can safely say it is now a baby. Some would argue, but if we use our English language words properly, we go from fetus to baby, then toddler, child, preteen, teenager, and so on. Calling a fetus a child, your child, is about as accurate as calling a teenager a middle-aged adult. I personally am not okay with abortions after the point of viability because I do believe it is then a baby. At that point, although it's healthier to do a normal birthing, perhaps a C-section could be offered if a woman absolutely does not want to give birth for some reason. Perhaps choosing viability as a legal cutoff could be a part of some compromise on this extremely emotional and controversial issue. I'm not saying that this is the answer or that this is not the answer. All I am proving here is that these are the conversations we need to be having, and that we could find a middle ground if people were willing to do it, to act like adults and say, we all live here in the same country, let's try to find something that we can agree on instead of just trying to force our way on everybody else. I could go on, but my point has been made. Even with the most controversial issues in our society, if we have the will and we have the maturity to act as adults, we can have these conversations and find some kind of a middle ground. Even if it still makes us uncomfortable, we need to find some kind of a middle ground instead of having this constant, ongoing, pointless fighting over key issues that we are simply not going to change each other's minds on, no matter how much we fight and argue about it. We are not producing an actual result with this. We are burning bridges with each other, we are wasting time, and we are tearing our own society apart, the fabric of our own community apart by behaving this way. And this is not the way for mature adults to behave and set a good example for kids. My last statement on this issue in this piece is that we should also recognize that pro-choice also means being against forced and coerced abortions. There is no choice in a forced abortion. Many people who call themselves pro-choice seem to miss this point, and I say this only because I'm the only person I have ever heard make this point. Whether or not we continue this pointless gridlock in our society of strictly opposing views is up to the will of the people. It will require us to bridge our divides, if we are to overcome it, between extreme liberalism and extreme conservatism, between Democrats and Republicans, and the aimless deadlock of two equally corrupt political parties that do not care about you or your problems, or your families, or your friends, or any of your needs. We also need to bridge the massive lingering divide between the North and the South in this country that has kept on since the Civil War of the 1860s, where neither side makes an effort to even try to understand the other, so everyone just uses the same old insults and put-downs about each other and at each other. I'm from the North and have been living in the South. Ideally, everyone in this country would get to have that experience of living in both places. Many people from where I'm from have many negative opinions of Southerners, based largely simply on never having been here, lived here, and known any Southerners. It is simply ignorance. This hatred between North and South came to the fore for the umpteenth time during the COVID-19 pandemic. From what I saw, the majority of Northerners were in favor of stricter measures regarding vaccines, masks, and lockdowns, in line with what the majority of people in the medical community were saying. Southerners were usually more in favor of going for what's called herd immunity, with less strict measures in line with not trusting what the medical community was saying. Many people from the North who didn't bother to get to know better took this as proof that Southerners are stupid, like they already thought. In fact, it was a demonstration of their intelligence based on the typically poor infrastructure in the South. This argument sounds a bit insane, so bear with me here. In my time in the South, I have heard almost nothing but bad accounts of the work of medical doctors and nurses down here. Several women I've talked to in the time I've been here have had miscarriages and of wanted pregnancies. And the medical staff they dealt with were extremely rude, extremely judgmental, acted as if they were tramps, even if they were in very serious, long-term, committed relationships. They did not do their jobs properly in regards to cleaning everything out, and it made it so these women had to do a massive cleanup with dead fetal tissue, which can cause them all kinds of health problems, and they had to do that themselves. One man I know who was suffering from some mini strokes for a while had some medical staff just put him on a bed and go take their break. And he had to get a friend of his to get him out of there and drive him for an hour to a hospital that would actually take care of him. In the past year, I got very sick and went to a nurse practitioner. The long and short of that was that she spent months and cost my insurance hundreds upon hundreds of dollars to see her, take prescription medications long-term for the first time in my life, run tests, be referred to someone else, have all the tests come back negative and never get any answers, but her and the doctor she referred me to insisted that the answer was for them to keep doing increasingly expensive tests and keep having me take prescription stomach medications for an ulcer, even though we'd already proven that I didn't have an ulcer. At one point, I told them that I had eliminated my stomach pain by Googling natural remedies to cleanse the gallbladder and following the suggestions from the internet. Now, my mother had a lot of health books at home, so when I see this stuff on the internet, I tend to know if it sounds right or not as well. So one of these suggestions led me to drink tea with a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar and a tablespoon of lemon juice in it every day. Not pleasant to drink, but it helped. So that eliminated my pain, and the doctor said he still wanted for me to get tests done for a stomach ulcer, and I said that's insane. You don't cure stomach ulcer pain by drinking acid. Obviously, it is not a stomach ulcer. This was shortly before I fired them as my healthcare providers and began calling lawyers to ask if I could sue them for all the money they had cost me. Lawyers would take my information, but they would never get back to me. One time, I randomly got an actual lawyer on the phone, not the lawyer's office, which is what I actually had been getting. So I got an actual lawyer on the phone, and he was very blunt with me and said, "You don't have a case because you got better. You're not sick enough, you're not dead, so you don't have a case. Medical staff being negligent, forgetting about you for 3 weeks, leaving you sick for months because I didn't really know what was wrong with you and couldn't figure it out. That's just medicine in the US today, so you don't have a case, sorry." And I said, "Well, thank you for being honest." And I gave him a 5-star review on Google for at least being honest with me, so I wasn't wasting my time on it anymore. So lawyers and school staff like to actually ghost you if you ask a question they don't want to answer, which is what I was getting at the other legal offices. It was very frustrating. So when these are the so-called medical and college-educated experts that you're dealing with, like I have been here in the South and like these Southerners have been dealing with, are you going to believe what they say when they tell you how to handle a pandemic or anything else? Hell no. These people are idiots, they're irresponsible, they just want to suck your money up. There's no reason to listen to them. So when that's the kind of infrastructure that you're dealing with and the kind of medical professionals you're dealing with, you're not going to listen to what they have to say. It's actually a sign of the Southerners' intelligence that they didn't respect what the medical community was saying because of the medical community that they are accustomed to having to deal with. They were not impressed by these medical experts. Meanwhile, most Southerners just wanted to say that Northerners were being impractical, brainwashed, and giving all the power of the people to the government during this pandemic. They did not stop to consider why the North, generally speaking, was listening to the medical experts. because the healthcare infrastructure in the North is generally better, because the North won the Civil War. It didn't have its economy crushed like the South did. People in this country were, as per usual, not communicating. They were shouting their view and their view only. This is not how you make a community, a country function, let alone function well. In truth, it has always been this way in this country. Leading up to the U.S. Civil War, the North did not try to help the South move away from its economic dependence on slave labor. Instead, it just insisted that it was right and the South was morally wrong in this matter, and that was all there was to it. They did not consider how they were going to impoverish the South's economy by getting rid of the slave labor. Now, abolishing slavery was 100% right. I'm behind that all the way. But the North could have tried to help the South. It had less infrastructure and less population. It was economically dependent on slavery. The North could have come in and said, look, we are completely morally opposed to this, but we understand it's going to damage your economy. Let's try to work together on a solution where we can abolish all of the slavery because it's wrong, but we won't completely bankrupt your economy. You'll still be okay. Let's work on that. Let's figure out how we can do that. The North did not do that. They just came in and said, we know better than you, and you will do things our way. And that was what happened. And then after it won the war and it came down supposedly, the North came down supposedly for Reconstruction, they largely just took advantage of the place and its people. And then we get this term carpetbagger, who was someone from the North with a suitcase, basically a kind of suitcase that the bottom of it looked like a carpet. So that's a carpetbagger. And that is someone who comes down to the South and takes advantage of the people, someone from the North. And anyone who's willing to work with them who's from the South is called a scalawag. That's someone who will betray their own people. I actually wonder, given the state of the public services here in the South, how federal money for social services is being allocated, especially because I know California gets a lot of this money. Though they do admittedly contribute a lot of money to the economy between their hundreds of miles of farmlands and their wine country and the TV and film industries. But I'm wondering if it's being allocated fairly and going to where it is most needed or not. Perhaps the North needs to sacrifice some benefits for a while so we could bolster the infrastructure here in the South. If you know your U.S. Civil War history, you'll understand why California is part of the North. That being said, what this region lacks in infrastructure, it makes up for in heart and food that actually tastes like flavor. Southern people, generally speaking, are nice and helpful people. When I moved here and got a car, I thought I would need a AAA Auto Club membership. So, for example, if you break down, you can get towed, you can get extra advice on what mechanics to go to, that kind of thing. So to my surprise, people here had never heard of it. And I didn't know how you could not have heard of it. It's a big thing that everybody knows about in the North. I remember one time when my dad and I were driving back to Oregon from Minnesota after staying with some extended family for a while, we broke down. And we didn't even know if we were in Minnesota or Iowa. It was the middle of winter. It was very cold and windy. There was a big wind chill factor. Many cars passed us by on the freeway. And then eventually a state trooper saw us and pulled over and told us which state we were in, which was Iowa, and gave us a mile mark. This is totally normal in the North, and we didn't expect anything different. We told him we have a cell phone and it's charged, and we called AAA and asked to get towed, and we got towed. This is what we expected to have happen. But here in the South, if you break down, I swear to you, a redneck in a pickup truck will appear out of nowhere and help you. And they will give you advice on which auto mechanics to go to, which places you can go to that won't take advantage of you. So you do not need a AAA Auto Club membership. Hence, nobody knows what you're talking about when you say a AAA Auto Club membership. They look at you like you have two heads, expecting them to know what that is. They don't need it here because of how nice and neighborly they can be. Northerners have some very hateful, negative stereotypes in their heads about Southerners, usually revolving around thinking they aren't smart. And Southerners have some very hateful ideas about Northerners, usually revolving around thinking all they care about is money and not family or family values. Some younger Southerners now even make a distinction between Northerners and Yankees. And the term Yankee, which always refers to a Northerner, has a different and unflattering meaning, whereas Northerner still just means that someone is from the North. This dislike and mistrust goes both ways, and in both cases there is some truth to it and a lot of false to it. For example, the school infrastructure is probably worse in the South, hence that lack of education, but that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is stupid just because they speak in a way where their grammar isn't correct. When you actually hear some Southerners talk about their opinion of the government and what it's doing and what it should be doing for the people, they're actually quite smart. They actually understand politics quite well. They just aren't speaking with proper grammar. They aren't conjugating the past participle of the verb properly with irregular verbs. And with Northerners, a lot of Northerners think that caring about your family means having fewer children so you can provide better for the children that you do have. That doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is valuing money over family. They're valuing family, but they're approaching it in a different way. So I propose we do something more productive from now on and find something nice to say about both sides. The North, which includes California, has been part of many technological revolutions that have benefited the masses, and art movements like the emergence of grunge music out of Seattle, Washington. The South has really good food, and it gave birth to jazz, soul, R&B, and blues. The music and the culture from the music. There are good things and people from both regions. We shouldn't hate each other, and we should be trying to work together while appreciating contributions from both sides rather than trying to beat the other side into submission all the time. There is not only an overarching selfishness at the rotten core of the modern U.S. American psyche, which has everyone insisting that their view be forced on everyone else rather than that everyone needs to have the maturity to compromise. There is a perverse and cruel lack of empathy for others. An example of this is when a teen girl or woman has an unwanted crisis pregnancy, and instead of approaching her with kindness and having a dialogue with her such as, "We're sorry you're in such a bad situation. Let us help you get through the pregnancy, help you with healthcare needs, and help you find an adoption agency." Instead, the narrative often goes more like this. "You disgusting whore. He wouldn't have raped you unless you tempted him, whore. And now you're thinking about abortion, so you want to be a murderer too?" I would like for everyone to pause there and ask themselves this simple question. Is that what Jesus would do? The man of compassion and neighborliness? If you're only a Sunday Christian, you are not a real Christian. In fact, most of the people, almost all the people I've known in my life who routinely went to church every Sunday were very malicious, bad people throughout their weekly lives outside of church, which I suppose explained why they felt such a need to go to church every Sunday and try to basically bribe their way into God's good graces instead of just being decent human beings throughout the week, not stabbing people in the back, not spreading malicious rumors, and so forth. The third main problem that I see at the core of this country's psyche today is an overriding lack of willingness to strive for the maturity to take responsibility for oneself and one's own actions and insist that others, especially adults, do the same. So the woman who gets pregnant from rape is blamed for the rape because she's inherently guilty of being female. It was a temptation for somebody. Political rightists do not tell the rapist that he is responsible for committing the crime of rape. Ironically, if someone robs a bank, nobody blames the bank for being inherently tempting because it is a bank. The bank robber is assumed to be responsible for his or her own crime of robbing a bank and is made to take responsibility for it. But of course, we could easily bounce that idea back the other way and ask if it's right for at least adults that have chosen to have sex and knowing what the consequences can be to be allowed to terminate a pregnancy. Abortions for rape and incest survivors is a related but also extremely different issue. We need to look at ourselves and ask if that sends the message you want young people growing up to see. This idea of just being able to get out of the consequences of actions an adult has willingly taken. We're assuming this wasn't from an emotionally or otherwise abusive relationship as well. So is this a good idea? If all you're focused on is what you want and you want an abortion, then you'll support one set of legal rights. If what you're focused on is how your actions may affect your community and the message your actions will send to young people growing up in your community, you will likely support a different set of legal rights. In this case, I would argue that the answer lies in making a decision that will do the least harm to a child or what is the potential to one day be a child. For example, I know a woman who gave birth to 2 kids over the years at separate times, and she really didn't want them and she didn't want to be a mom, but she felt that she needed to take responsibility for her actions in this way. She led a very chaotic life, was on and off meth, and drug her kids through her chaotic life with her, never really committing to the job of mother. One of her kids grew into a teen boy who got in trouble a lot with the law, so his dad gave him an ultimatum and he joined the military. He served our country in the Middle East, and he came home completely traumatized, so angry with his family he won't speak to them, unable or unwilling to finish the college degree he started with the GI Bill paying for it, and seemingly unable to hold down a job. The other grew into a teen girl who got pregnant at 15. Now this mom had told her daughter that whenever she wanted birth control, she could just go to the mother and they would go to the doctor together and she would be okay with it and she would just get her birth control. But the daughter didn't even wait for that. The girl wound up on drugs and pregnant 4 times, adopting 2 out and leaving the other 2 with this mom because she didn't want the responsibility of being a mom herself. This girl started abusing meth. She dropped out of high school and willingly sold herself to a Mexican cartel for use as a heroin-addicted sex object. This mom told me that the 3rd time she got pregnant without wanting to be pregnant, she had an abortion. And in this context, the 3rd pregnancy is arguably the lucky one. If you can't raise a child, and given the fact that the foster child system and orphanages are severely overcrowded and those kids typically get abused, even by the other foster kids, sometimes abortion may be the only humane option under the circumstances. We need for adults to act like adults, and we need for this to happen before we hit too strongly on how disrespectful youth are today. It is a 2-way social contract, and the latter must follow the former. Many youth today have grown up seeing shows like Jersey Shore and adults around them acting in that vein. And this is the kind of show that promotes stupidity and promiscuity, and it celebrates people who are technically adults choosing to contribute nothing to society. If anything should be banned, it should be shows like Jersey Shore on grounds of public decency and the public welfare. We do not need for young people to grow up thinking that anything people like those on shows like Jersey Shore routinely do is in any way, shape, or form acceptable behavior for an adult, or anyone else for that matter. We real adults who work our jobs, take responsibility for the consequences of our actions, pay our taxes, vote, and in most any other way behave like responsible, respectable human beings who actually make the effort to be good people and contribute positively to our community, to our society, to our country, have become the minority, sadly. And is a very big part of why the youth in our country today don't act respectful towards adults. We need for adults to set a good example for a change, I might add. Too often, people make excuses for their bad behavior rather than being adults, admitting what they've done wrong, apologizing, making it up to someone if needed, and then moving on. Even murderers use the defense in a court of law that they had a bad childhood. That was why they took somebody's life. Millions of U.S. citizens don't vote, a basic, free, and relatively easy way for any of us to act as adults. and participate in the whole community. There is a lot of election fraud, and that is another issue. When I live thousands of miles away and across the Atlantic Ocean from this country, I still registered to vote from overseas every year, and I didn't miss a single election. This is part of being an adult. People died so that we could have this right. And then they fought more so that racial minorities and females could also have this right. It is not to be balked at, and it is never to be taken for granted. And if you don't vote, then you don't have a right to complain about anything in this country. And you are not doing your part to try to make this mess we're in any better. There's a massive shortage of workers right now because many people seem to think they shouldn't have to work to pay their own way through life. One of the most basic functions of being an adult. Unless you're a stay-at-home parent, they earn their keep in other and very important ways as well. When the U.S. was founded, it was an inspiration to the world. A democratic republic where the people, and not just the king, got to say how the people would live. They got to decide their futures. Over time, we as a nation improved on the original model, including the votes of men that didn't own property, African American human beings, and other non-whites, and then finally women as well. After the two world wars, the world loved the U.S. We were the heroes that would rush in and save the day. Then during the Cold War, we were so competitive, we wanted to be number one at everything, including space technology and other cutting-edge innovations. And now where are we? We as a nation spend more money incarcerating our youth than educating them, and our prisons are traded on the stock market. Forget number one for education worldwide, we aren't even in the top 30. China is the leader in solar technology. We are the leader in producing dumbifying entertainment that promotes Hollywood morals, meaning absolutely no morals, values, or ethics whatsoever. We routinely have mass shootings and many abortions of human fetuses, and stupidly think that the answer to both of these problems is to make them illegal, to ban abortions, to ban guns, as if illegalizing things somehow magically stops them, like waving a magic wand. We do not do the intelligent thing of addressing the underlying issues that cause these social problems. For example, with the mass shootings, that we have a society that does not have a community and is not coming together to raise our young people and help them to feel that sense of being valued and help them to have the mental and emotional resilience to go through the challenges of life and not go insane and want to shoot up a place. Or the underlying causes of unwanted pregnancies and of teen pregnancies and of teens getting sexually transmitted diseases. Instead, we keep doing the same things over and over, expecting a different result, like idiots. We have semi-frequent race riots, looting, and sometimes just general madness in the streets of our major cities, which is another thing that is a bad influence on young people because they watch adults behaving this way on the news. And of course, that's going to contribute to that lack of respect we see for adults that the youth in our country have today. With images like that of what adults are doing, can you blame them? Is this the nation that we want to be? That is what we need to ask ourselves. One that keeps trying to solve its problems with the same failed solutions they tried last time, like idiots. People who hate fellow citizens of a different political party so much that we refuse to talk. People who refuse to compromise like any small school child is told to learn to do by their mommy. A nation that, unlike countries like Finland, Sweden, and Switzerland, we flat out refuse to work together for the common good of all citizens and of our own home country. The United States of America is an amazing nation with incredible freedoms, incredible opportunities, and a government where the citizens are supposed to play an active and enduring role. And unlike in many other countries, here we can. I ask you all to consider what kind of future we and the next generation especially are going to have if this gridlock insanity in this country continues. Because at this rate, no one is going to need to invade this country and fight us to destroy us. We're too busy gnawing off our own legs. We need to stop fighting, start compromising, start having adults act like adults, and start working together for the common good of our community in this country. Whether we will or won't in time is the question. This book is one little step in the correct direction to have representatives of the two main political parties do something, anything, together. But we have a lot of work to do and a long way to go. I hope everyone loves this country enough to figure out how we're going to work together to live together all in the one country. Before this place collapses and descends into total madness, which frankly seems more likely every day, especially as I periodically have to be involved in active shooter drills because I work as a school teacher. I hope everyone loves this country enough to do what's right and start working together and improve this place for ourselves and, more importantly, for the next generation who has to inherit this mess. Thank you for watching the Book Show on Diversity TV. You know we appreciate your viewership. Thank you, take care of yourself, and I hope you find what you're looking for.